story of Alexis. So the title of my presentation is going to be Non-Marvelous Realism in Chronique d'un Faux Amour of Jacques-Stéphane Alexis, ? And the sub-question is, more precisely, does the narrative of Chronique d'un Faux Amour support or flout Alexis' marvelous realism? I didn't answer the question. So it's going to be yours to do. So Chronique d'un Faux Amour is the longest of the short stories that compose Alexis' volume Romancero aux Étoiles. That is Alexis' last work of fiction that was published in 1960, actually a little months before he got assassinated, and undoubtedly his most playful one. In fact, Jean-Claude claimed Romancero aux Étoiles in the lineage of l'audience, but that's another debate, another discussion. Romancero aux Étoiles recreates the fortuitous encounter of a man self-identified in the volume as a young pied poudré, a vagrant, with an old, ageless man, the legendary Le Vieux Vent Caraïbe, the old Caribbean wind himself, and their eventual confabulation, broken into multiple small stories they entertain themselves with. So the back and forth telling stories that encompass Haitian history, all kind of tales, Bouki and Malice, etc. The length of Chronique d'un Faux Amour forces attention first, as it goes on 48 pages of the volume, while all the other tales of the book are on average 25 pages long. In fact, I have to share my screen with you, and I'm sorry, but I was so busy listening to these friends that I forgot that I need to do that. I can say share here, and I can make that a beautiful presentation from the beginning here. So this is the question title and the subtitle, and we'll go. So yeah, I was saying that it is the longest, but it's not only the only thread that makes it be set apart in this volume. Also noticeable is the fact that Chronique d'un Faux Amour is the only one of the stories where the narrative I is neither the young man or the old Caribbean wind. The narrator is a woman. And the woman happens to be as well the protagonist. Only in Chronique d'un Faux Amour, the form changes. It is introduced in the volume as a journal the nephew, which is the young gentleman, found in the attic of an old house. Because the form is a journal, it is the only story of the volume that is narrated in a completely closed off train of thought of the journal owner. Indeed, to convey the confinement of the woman in her own head and her deafness to the world, Alexis makes a remarkable use of the present tense to navigate 2 time periods cohabiting in her head. There is a simple present that is used, which is the narrative present, the moment of the journaling itself. That's the plane that depicts the actual situation and state of the woman while she's writing. And there is a historical present that is used for the second plane that should be in the past, but that brings in the woman's recollection of her past, but in present tense, in multiple analepses. The seamless switches between these 2 planes, so 2 times, present and past, is only indicated spatially in the book, each time by 3 asterisk punctuation marks as in this picture. So these punctuation marks that are here are the only thing that tells you she's switching from one time to another. We talked a lot about Alexis as a revolutionary novelist, but in terms of form, until I discover unknown texts in our disparate Haitian bibliography, I will repeat after Leon-Francois Hoffman that Alexis initiated a first in the Haitian fiction with the use of interior monologue style and this systematic exploitation of analepsis. He also mentions that he would be the first Haitian writer to express feminine sexuality and desire in such the crude, vivid, and at the same time very poetic fashion he does in Chronique d'un faux amour. At her debutante ball, where she knowingly and aggressively shocks the public, the 16 years old semi-virgin confesses. The book is not translated into English. I won't have time to really give like a respectable translation, and I don't have the talent of Dr. Charles. So I'm going to be projecting the quotes here. I'll read them and you will follow along with that. So she confesses, dans ma guêpe tremblent mes seins ronds, chauds comme des œufs frais. Une rivière de chaleur coule entre mes cuisses. Her fiancé, a fleuré mon encens, le musc charnel qui s'évapore de mes aisselles. Il a éprouvé, il s'est brûlé à la claire chaleur qui monte de mon pénil. Il a été chatouillé par l'intermittent frisson qui parcourt mes reins de pouliche cambrée. Je m'ouvrirai à lui comme s'entrebâille un fruit mûr. Il me couvrira de son corps comme au mois des chaleurs, les matins couvrent les chiennes. Chronique d'un faux amour is the only story of the volume where the unnamed protagonist, this woman, is introduced just as a person of high social rank. This identifier is later revealed as a key element in the conflictual mapping of the narrative. And lastly, but not the least, the narrator and protagonist is a zombie, which brings odd and questionable associations in the text that we will discuss later. The plot itself, Chronique d'un faux amour, starts in the midst of the litany of a woman confined against her will in a French Carmelite convent in Anjou. She hates it there. She hates everybody. And unlike the other nuns, she doesn't take part in the life of the convent. In her cell, where she encloses herself, her main preoccupation is to keep herself awake, to avoid a dark world of the night that she called the Empire of the Dead, where the Black Baron gallops. L'Empire des Morts où galope le Baron Noir. By her own account, she's been successful at that for the past 6 days by repeatedly knocking a silver spoon she stole in the kitchen on the gold engagement ring her fiancé slid on her finger years ago to disturb the silence of the convent. It's not clear how long she's been in this distorted universe of her mind. She said, voilà 10 ans que je lutte contre le silence. Voilà 10 ans que je lutte contre le sommeil. Je ne veux pas dormir. 10 years in the convent. All we know in terms of chronology is that in the midst of her psychotic crisis, she narrates the short-lived love story and her zombification on the day of their wedding by the problematic adoptive father of her fiancé, who managed to keep her captive at his mercy until his death. Very appealing menu, and to that, the luxuriance of Alexis' style compel a close literary analysis of the text to start approaching the measure of Alexis' narrative genius. We won't do that. Leon-Francois Hoffman offers some indication on how we could explore the short story, but he didn't go that further. Other studies of the text I come across, they are more interested into thematic and symbolic interpretations, trying to decode possible political stance or hidden messages from the text. One thing that is apparently overlooked is the daring novelty of the psychiatric exploration of the zombie. That was much expected from Alexis being both a neurologist and a writer. He kind of knew how maybe the brain works for that. But when the narrator thinks for herself, peut-être aujourd'hui, dans tout mon être, y a-t-il aujourd'hui dans tout mon être un imperceptible ralentissement de la vie, etc., etc. Mon grand lys ne grandit plus, il décroît, il dépousse et rentre dans la terre. This kind of consideration in her woman brain, for me, inform on her state of mind, but they don't move the story anyway, in any way. So for me, the plot of Chronique d'un faux amour holds in really one single sentence. It is the story of the love obsession of an upper-class Haitian woman zombified by the nègres orteils turned Grandon, adoptive father of her fiancé on the day of their wedding. I'm sorry for the nègres orteils. I don't know how to translate that. That would be some kind of peasant that his big toe, I guess, is so visible that he's reduced to his toe, orteil being toe in Creole. So the conflicting pair here, the woman protagonist versus the father-in-law, the antagonist, remains at the core of the story, the central point from which it operates. Nevertheless, this antagonist arrived incidentally only at 2/3 of the story. I counted, again, I like to count. At 2/3 of the story, like a needed carrier of the bride's disagreement. He pops up again a little 2 or 3 pages later as the zombie master. And a couple of pages later by the end, he's mentioned as being old and dead. Trying to solve the quandary of this undeveloped antagonist, also unnamed in the story, created by Alexis, and the ensuing implications of his narrative choices here led to the question I asked in my introduction. Does the narrative of Chronique d'un faux amour support or flout Alexis' marvelous realism? Of course, the absolute and unconditional narrative adjunctivity of the narrator here creates a unique and unescapable worldview. Under the principle of erudition, I will abide with that despite her mental instability, she is able to navigate alternately and easily between her troubled present and her orderly past, never that they cross one each other in one sentence or one train of thought or one paragraph. The both are really separated. So we can assume that they're separated in her head as well. With a very clear head, she remembers being the center of her universe. Unapologetic, she naturally opens the door wide on her social class, displays her contempt for her Martiniquais Muka Nani, comments mockingly her father's privilege and the Cercle Bellevue's practices that, of course, her and her father go to, praises the fiancé presented before her. He is, of course, the right fit. All the while, she turns completely erratic each time her attention is brought back to her presence in the convent. Let's give that the narrative convention. Until the encounter between the bride-to-be and the adoptive father of the mysterious but godly and enamored Lucien Damas, the only one having a name, her fiancé. I can't help envision all the other could-bes, the many possibilities of such a visit. Alexis excelled, and he broke his own record here stylistically. Let's listen to the young woman first, before even meeting the man, her fear and her content. J'ai toujours appréhendé de frayer avec les gens qui ne sont pas de notre monde. Mon père a jugé que nous étions obligés d'aller rendre visite à ce vieil oncle, un ours mal léché à ce qu'on dit, toujours vêtu de gros bleus, de sandales de cuir brutes et qui ne sait même pas s'exprimer en français. Papa aurait-il des problèmes d'argent? This question, pardon me, remained unanswered. She's rather snapped up by a maleficent sortilege. And here, unfortunately, I'm not doing text analysis, but if you can read, you'll see, if you can read through the thing, you'll see the terms, the brutal terms that are used to describe the man and his surrounding. Voici les médeciniers diaboliques, les manceliers fous, les concombres zombies torses et toute la flore mystérieuse qui jaillit autour de cet épais et gras vieillard aux cheveux roux et crépus qui nous accueille, assis au milieu des touffes. Ce nègre grimaud, gorille à la peau de brique et au sourire ambigu, me regarde avec des yeux mouvants et rouges qui dansent, tels de grosses mouches qui s'agiteraient devant ses orbites, cupules de flasques, de chair flasque et ridées. And in a sort of prefiguration of her zombie fate, she lost total control of herself in a second. The man is transformed almost before her eyes into a monster, an animal of prey. She calls him gorille, silène, gras, ventouse, and she saw herself already as an ideal victim. Ses regards font une forêt de lianes enchevêtrées autour de moi, des regards sirupeux qui glissent de mon front à ma nuque, sur mon cou, mes épaules, puis coulent sur tout mon corps comme une cascade de fourmis aux dards lubriques. Ces regards tissent autour de moi de véritables raies qui m'empoisonnent et me clouent au sol. Je m'arrache à cette impression poisseuse, hypnotique, et fais effort pour m'approcher de ce silène gras. Il se soulève, puis, tendant les mains, il se saisit de ma tête et colle sa bouche suçoire dans mon cou. Les yeux s'immobilisent, puis disparaissent dans des orbites plissées. I mean, for me, this is like nightmare identified in like a couple of lines. But despite this traumatic encounter, the wedding is planned, and with, of course, the condition that the embarrassing character of her like father-in-law would not attend. He appeared unexpectedly again the day of their wedding in their house, managed his way to the young woman's room and presented her with the fateful bouquet that she accepted naturally. Did you read Chroniques d'un faux amour? I read Chroniques d'un faux amour and questions flooded, all impossible to elucidate. How old is this woman now that she's in the convent? Where was her mother? What happened to her? How long has she been a zombie? What are the motifs of her father to impose this mésalliance? Why did the in-law turn her into a zombie again? To keep her in a black painted room untouched for we don't know how long, she never said. Maybe because he's an exote, a peasant, unable to even speak French. I'm quoting here. Is it what naturally happens when these two kinds collide? What we are left with, for me, is a mentally deranged woman, zombie, as the only point of reference. Her caricatured reality of the clash of irreconcilable social classes, her grotesque reproduction of the association Negro, peasant, animal world, ugliness, baka, evil. These are all the words that she uses in the text. And the impossibility for the leader, all these qualifications or traits embodied in one single inconvenient father-in-law. Impossible for them to make a case for themselves. Again, the form of the journal and the madness of the woman, although that the narrative leave as many holes as they want into the story. But when the machine creaks, we ask the engineer. So the incapacity to answer these questions takes us inevitably to the author. How would Alexis stand behind his story? Was this marvelous realism? To not conclude and to keep the question open, I will only notice that the discussion between writers and critics in Haitian literature show that they don't always agree or are necessarily sure what marvelous realism entails. I will cite two extremes here. In the analysis of Chronique d'un Faux Amour, Hoffman came up with a formal and totally depoliticized and decontextualized definition that is, to my sense, non-operative. He said, du point de vue stylistique, ce sont bien entendu les passages où I have that here, ce sont bien entendu les passages où la narratrice perd pied, où la raison n'ordonne plus sa pensée selon les structures expressives logiques, où les images fulgurantes viennent rendre compte de son déchirement qui illustre le mieux ce qu'Alexis a appelé le réalisme merveilleux et que nous allons pour finir essayer de cerner de plus près. Moderators, I'm sorry, I am concluding here, but I cannot watch the chat. So please feel free to cut me off. But I don't think I have for more than 2 minutes. Am I in time?
It's not. You have 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay.
Plus 3.
Okay, thank you. Ce réalisme merveilleux me semble, en ce qui concerne le style, découler en grande partie de l'abondance et de la nature des métaphores. Jean-Claude Fiolet, at an extreme opposite, offers a most exclusive and most radical discussion on the conceptualization of the marvelous realism. He argues, le réalisme magique tel qu'inventé par la critique européenne avait trouvé son cadre et son allant. Alejo Carpentier, suite à une expérience haïtienne, saisit êtres et choses dans l'extraordinaire, l'extravagance des fantasmes. La magie, puisqu'il faut l'appeler ainsi, ou encore plus précisément le merveilleux, tel que Carpentier le conçoit, verse dans la névrose, fixant, sacralisant êtres et choses dans l'intemporalité du dire, dans l'irréalité du vécu. Mostly, he concludes rather on the urgency to augment, enlarge what he calls notre capital de mythologie, especially because, and then Fiolet continues, nous avons eu besoin de mythologie pour survivre dans et à l'enfer colonial, aux dictatures, à la misère, à nos angoisses de peuple, à nos angoisses d'hommes, à nos angoisses d'être. Nous survivrons, nous continuerons de survivre en créant à chaque nouvelle circonstance de nouvelles mythologies. And my last really couple of sentences here. For my part, in Alexis du réalisme merveilleux des Haïtiens, I see a concept taking shape, trying to find the words to express itself. Mostly a thought in process, opening a way through our créolité. Interesting side note, Alexis never mentioned the word créolité in his text, but all the linéaments of créolité are articulated in this very representation of the réalisme merveilleux des Haïtiens. Unfortunately, a thought of Alexis at that stage, for me, for what I think, is still too attached to the universalist precepts of the Western canon. And I read here when he says, qu'est-ce donc le merveilleux, sinon l'imagerie dans laquelle un peuple enveloppe son expérience, reflète sa conception du monde et de la vie, sa foi, son espérance, sa confiance en l'homme. Great, I like that. But further, unfortunately, he added, naturellement, il faut toujours faire mieux. Et les combattants d'avant-garde de la culture haïtienne se rendent compte de la nécessité de transcender résolument ce qu'il y a d'irrationnel, ce qu'il y a d'irrationnel, de mystique et d'animiste dans leur patrimoine national. Mais ils ne croient pas qu'il y a là un problème insoluble. Ils jetteront le vêtement animiste qui cache le noyau réaliste. Ils remettront sur les pieds ceux qui marchent trop souvent sur la tête. But do the people think of their life, their culture, their reality as marvelous, animist, and mystical? Do the people want, need to change those traits of their cultural patrimony? Change by whom? And who are the people anyway? In his most recent nostalgic homage to Alexis, Lionel Trouillot reasserts, and rightly so, the need to not parcel Alexis, the need to keep him whole. And he said, Alexis, c'est un démembré. Il fut beaucoup de choses et il est tout ce qu'il fit dans de multiples domaines. Oui, un démembré. So we will not, I will not, but we may need to project his thought further. We will never know if Alexis thought he ever attained his marvelous realism ever, or in a text as Chronique d'un faux amour. I tend to think that with time and much possibly some decantation, he could be debating today whether or not he did, or even if it is that the question to ask. For if we agree to accept all this as realism, we may ask, what was the marvelous in it? Thank you.